Okay, in the interest of time, I think we'll get started. Welcome, everybody. We appreciate you signing up for and participating in today's webinar. I am Tara King, a Senior Project Director at the American Association for the Advancement of Science, or AAAS for short. AAAS is the world's largest general science association and the publisher of the Science family of journals. I serve as the Center Coordinator for the S-STEM Resource and Evaluation Center, which is abbreviated as the S-STEM REC. Through the S-STEM REC, AAAS is happy to facilitate this opportunity to provide insight and help with your questions as you prepare to submit a 2025 S-STEM grant proposal. Next slide. Before we jump in, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. You may ask questions at any time throughout the webinar. It's never too early to do so. Please use the Q&A feature to type in your questions. In addition, we've enabled upvoting. So if you see a question that aligns with something you're thinking about or a question that you'd also like to hear the answer to, please give it a thumbs up. We will prioritize getting answers to questions that have the most upvotes. Also, please keep an eye on not only the open question tab, but the answered questions tab, as some of the more straightforward questions might be answered directly there. The slides being presented today can be found on the AAAS S-STEM REC website. If you'd like to follow along with the slides on your computer, you can download them now. We'll put a link to the website that has the slides in the chat. Also, on this same page, a recording of today's webinar will be posted when it becomes available. We're happy to have 2 American Sign Language interpreters joining us today. In addition, we are pleased to have a live transcriptioner providing closed captioning. Our thanks to these individuals for helping us make the information presented in this webinar more widely accessible. We hope that the webinar runs smoothly for you today. But please, if you have any technical difficulties or questions, contact my colleague, Jamila Blake, in the chat, or send her an email at jblake@AAAS.org. Finally, we would really appreciate your feedback on today's webinar. We'd like to know how useful it was for you and any suggestions you have to improve it. A short survey will appear when you leave the webinar, and if you're unable to take it upon exiting today, a link to the survey will be emailed to you tomorrow. We thank you in advance for sharing your thoughts with us to help us improve our offerings for you. For anyone who's just joining us, hello and welcome. Next slide, please. My name is Tara King, and I am the Center Coordinator of the AAAS S-STEM Resource and Evaluation Center, or REC for short. We're thrilled to facilitate this proposal preparation webinar as part of the REC's work, which is made possible by funding from the National Science Foundation. So this webinar aims to provide support for individuals who are working to submit a 2025 S-STEM grant proposal. We're pleased to have a panel of former NSF S-STEM Program Directors with us today to provide their insights and help answer your questions. Let me provide a quick overview of today's agenda. We'll first share a bit about the AAAS S-STEM Resource and Evaluation Center and direct you to other resources that can help with your S-STEM proposal preparation. Then I'll share brief highlights of the 2025 S-STEM solicitation that are important for you to know about. After that, we'll begin our panel discussion. Joining us today are 3 fantastic individuals who are very knowledgeable about the NSF S-STEM program, as they have all previously served as S-STEM program directors. We'll spend the bulk of our time together discussing your questions with the panel. Remember to use the Q&A function to ask your questions. You could type them in at any time, and you can also upvote other folks' questions. We'll prioritize those that are upvoted and do our best to get through as many questions as possible today. Before I jump into the content of today's webinar, next slide, please. It's important for me to share a brief disclaimer with you. This material is based upon work supported by the National Science Foundation under grant number 2224093. Any opinions, findings, interpretations, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this material are those of its authors and do not represent the views of the AAAS Board of Directors, the Council of AAAS, AAAS's membership, or the National Science Foundation. Moreover, I want to share upfront that AAAS does not have information about if or how recent executive actions and memos from the administration may impact the 2025 NSF S-STEM solicitation. We'll share any relevant information with the S-STEM community as soon as it becomes available to us. NSF does have a website with guidance regarding their implementation of recent executive orders. We can post that link in the chat and a link to their contact form in the chat as well. Next slide. So some of you might be wondering, what is the AAAS S-STEM Rec? AAAS is a grantee of the National Science Foundation. In October 2022, through a competitive proposal process, AAAS received the award to manage the S-STEM Resource and Evaluation Center, or REC for short. The S-STEM REC is a new type of investment by NSF to create greater infrastructure, build community, coordinate work, and synthesize findings across the entire NSF S-STEM portfolio of projects. The REC's work focuses on promoting the exchange of ideas, resources, opportunities, and knowledge about effective strategies and practices to increase the number of talented, low-income students who obtain degrees and careers in STEM. The activities of the REC work across multiple levels. For instance, we support the effectiveness of the S-STEM portfolio through publishing S-STEM outcomes and impacts reports. We build the capacity of current and prospective S-STEM awardees through webinars like this one. And we support S-STEM scholars' STEM persistence and professional development through convening an annual in-person scholars meeting. We welcome you to visit the website to learn more about the REC and join our mailing list to stay updated and informed. Next slide. While the REC is managed by AAAS in coordination with NSF, we cannot reach all of our goals without the significant contributions of our full team. And this slide shows all of the organizations we partner with to carry out the work of the REC. Next slide. We'd like to make you aware of a set of complimentary webinars that one of our partners, NN Associates Inc., has recently hosted on the topics of developing research and evaluation plans, as well as developing and using a logic model or theory of change. Materials from these webinars provide additional guidance for your proposal preparation work. Links to these materials have been posted in the chat. Also, MN Associates Inc. has created a useful guidebook on preparing research and evaluation plans for NSF S-STEM grant proposals. This new resource is now available for download on the REC website as well. And finally, if you have specific questions related to drafting your research and evaluation plans, you can reach out to the MN Associates Inc. team by completing a request form with your specific inquiry. We posted a link to that form in the chat as well too. And we just want to note that the S-STEM REC is promoting consultation with MN Associates Inc. as they are a REC partner, but this does not constitute an endorsement of them as evaluators by the National Science Foundation. Next slide. And finally, the NSF website has extremely useful resources to use when preparing your S-STEM grant proposal. These include the full text of the 2025 S-STEM program solicitation, a recording of an overview webinar that explains the solicitation requirements in detail, and an FAQ document that answers the most commonly asked questions about the solicitation. All three links have been posted in the chat, and it's strongly encouraged that all prospective awardees review them. Now I'm going to switch gears and provide some important highlights about the 2025 S-STEM solicitation. The submission deadline is March 4th for all tracks. We have received word from NSF that this deadline remains unchanged. And next slide, please. And one more. Thanks. So for anyone interested in submitting a proposal to the S-STEM program, it's important to be aware of the program's overarching goals. The primary goal of the S-STEM program is to provide scholarships to academically talented domestic low-income students with unmet need who are pursuing an S-STEM eligible degree. In addition to scholarship support, S-STEM projects should include cohort building, and faculty mentoring, among other evidence-based activities, to provide curricular and co-curricular support to scholars. The selection and structure of these activities should be informed by their potential impact on the retention, success, and graduation rates of the supported scholars. For any novel approaches that will be tested during the course of their project, please note that these approaches should align appropriately with institutional context and resources. Proposals should also include explicit plans to disseminate findings that result from the tested activities. Next slide. Since the pursuit of a degree is central to S-STEM program goals, proposals should focus on helping scholars reach the milestone of graduating with a degree in an S-STEM eligible field. Upon graduation, projects should facilitate scholars' entry into the STEM workforce or the advancement of their education in STEM. This educational advancement can include transfer from an associate's to a bachelor's degree program or advancement from a bachelor's to graduate degree program in STEM, depending on what degrees the scholars are completing during the project. And next slide. In addition to providing scholarship support to academically talented low-income scholars, the S-STEM program seeks to advance our understanding of how to better serve these students beyond financial support. Analysis of student success, curricular pathways, inter- or intra-institutional collaborations, and institutional needs assessments are all lines of investigation that have the potential to strengthen a proposal. Next slide. So this slide contains a summary of the changes that have been made within the 2025 solicitation. The deadline for all tracks is March 4th, 2025, and will fall on the first Tuesday in March thereafter. Collaborative planning grants are no longer accepted as part of this submission deadline, but they're accepted on a rolling basis. The maximum request for track 1 is now $2 million, and scholarships must constitute at least 50% of the total budget request. Additional track 1 requirements are now in effect, which will be shown in later slides. For all proposal tracks, the required data regarding the pool of prospective scholars and the evaluation logic model must be included as supplementary documents and are no longer part of the project description. The next slide. Many of the updates made in previous solicitations remain in effect. The maximum annual scholarship amounts for undergraduates is still $15,000, and the maximum annual scholarship for graduate students is $20,000. The maximum duration for scholarship support is 5 years per each respective degree. S-STEM remains a last dollar scholarship, and the scholarships should meet a student's unmet need up to these maximum allowable amounts. The Office of Financial Aid must be involved in the determination of scholars' income eligibility, unmet need, and scholarship amounts. The Office of Financial Aid must also provide an institutional definition of low income that will be used to determine a STEM scholar eligibility. Also, in order to demonstrate project viability, proposers should provide data that show sufficient enrollments of students in the proposed disciplines and degree programs to meet the stated goals of the proposal. Next slide. This slide shows the common requirements of all tracks. A proposal to any track should include a literature review to support the inclusion of any proposed evidence-based activities. An institutional needs assessment can also be used to justify these activities. All proposals should describe plans to develop and support student cohorts and provide scholars with faculty mentors. It's also advisable to describe how mentors will be trained to serve the scholars. Since such activities cannot be required as a condition for receiving scholarship funds, it's recommended to consider how student engagement in these activities might be maximized. Additionally, proposals should describe a clear and specific evaluation plan that will be carried out by an evaluator who is external to the project. However, this does not necessarily require that the evaluator be external to the institution. Next slide. And this slide gives more details about Track 1 program requirements. Track 1, or the Institutional Capacity Building track, is limited to institutions that have not had active funding from the NSF S-STEM or STEP programs in the 5 years prior to the submission deadlines. So with respect to the upcoming March 4th deadline, any S-STEM award with an end date later than March 3rd, 2020 disqualifies that previously awarded institution from applying to track 1 of this upcoming S-STEM competition. You can explore the NSF Awards database to determine if or when your institution has had a past S-STEM or STEP award. Proposal budgets have a maximum allowed request of $2 million, and projects can have a duration of up to 6 years. At least 50% of the total request must be allocated to scholarships, which is a departure from past Track 1 proposal requirements. The principal investigator for Track 1 proposal must be a STEM faculty member currently teaching in one of the S-STEM eligible disciplines being served by the proposed scholarship funds, or a STEM administrator who has taught in one of those same fields. The requirement that the STEM administrator has to have taught in the past 2 years has been eliminated. If not serving as the PI, a STEM administrator, meaning department head or above, should also be a member of the project leadership team. Faculty members from all departments, including the proposal, should be playing a role in the project, either as a co-PI, senior personnel, or as a scholar mentor. Next slide. New to this year's solicitation, Track 1 proposals must now include plans for an initial planning or self-study period of 6 to 12 months. Scholars cannot be selected nor supported during this initial period. In keeping with the goal of Track 1, projects can engage in various activities to strengthen the position of the project team and/or the institution to more effectively support S-STEM scholars once the scholarships begin. The plans for this initial planning period should be described in a supplementary document called Track 1 Planning that includes defined activities, a clear timeline, and designated roles for project leadership team members. Next slide. So Track 2, or the Implementation Projects track, is open to any single institution of higher education accredited in the US. If student transfer or advancement to graduate school are part of the project, partnering institutions could be included as subawards. Proposal budgets for Track 2 have a maximum allowed request of $2 million, and projects have a duration of up to 6 years. At least 60% of the total request must be allocated to scholarships. Similar to Track 1, the principal investigator for a Track 2 proposal must be a STEM faculty member currently teaching in one of the S-STEM eligible disciplines being served by the proposed scholarship funds, or a STEM administrator who has taught in one of those same fields. The requirement that the STEM administrator has to have taught in the past 2 years has been eliminated. If not serving as the PI, a STEM administrator should also be a member of the project leadership team. As in Track 1, faculty members from all departments included in a Track 2 proposal should be playing a role in the project, either as a co-PI, senior personnel, or as a scholar mentor. And next slide. In terms of generation of knowledge, Track 1 and Track 2 proposals are meant to be scholarship intensive, meaning that formal research activities are not required in these tracks. The focus here should be on supporting the successful degree completion of scholars and their transition into the STEM workforce or advancing their studies in STEM. Proposals can use non-scholarship funds to provide a variety of institutional additional supports for scholars, including research experiences, conference travel, or internships. Track 1 and Track 2 proposals should seek to advance knowledge about scholar success through their project evaluation plan and should include substantive plans for dissemination. Next slide. Track 3, or the Interinstitutional Consortia track of the S-STEM program, is open to any US higher ed institution. Proposal submissions can be structured through subawards or multiple collaborative proposals. Combined project budgets have a maximum allowed request of $5 million, and projects can have a duration of up to 6 years. At least 60% of the total request must be allocated to scholarships. Track 3 proposals should include strong and mutually beneficial collaborations across all participating institutions. The PI of a Track 3 proposal must be either a faculty member currently teaching in one of the proposed S-STEM eligible disciplines, a STEM administrator, meaning department head or above, or a researcher whose expertise is in institutional, educational, or social science research in higher education. Next slide. In terms of generation of knowledge, in contrast to tracks 2 and 1, track 3 projects should engage in high-quality research to advance understanding of how to adapt, implement, and scale up effective evidence-based practices to foster more positive outcomes for low-income students in STEM. This research should be led by PIs, co-PIs, or senior personnel who are faculty with expertise in social science or educational research. The faculty involved in the research efforts cannot act as external evaluators for the same project. Also, track 3 research projects can be informed by various theoretical frameworks and methodological approaches. Next slide. So we know that was a lot of information, but we hope this very quick run through of important details for proposals in all tracks has been helpful. But please refer to the text of the solicitation, the NSF FAQ document, and the webinar recorded by NSF for more information. The next slide. So now it's my pleasure to welcome our panelists joining us today. We're so happy to have them here today. All 3 individuals have great expertise with the S-STEM program, as they have previously served as S-STEM Program Directors at the National Science Foundation. We'll put a link in the chat that includes short bios for each panelist. And we are, so grateful that they're spending time joining us today to share their wisdom and provide insight to help with all of your questions. Please continue writing your questions in the Q&A box and upvote questions that have been asked. You're welcome to ask your question addressed to a specific panelist if you'd like. If you want to do so, just indicate that. And remember to check the answer tab in the Q&A as well as the open tab, because some of the more simple questions might be answered directly there. So we'll open the discussion today by having each panelist say hello, introduce themselves, briefly tell us what their experience has been with the S-STEM program, and answer this question. So what one piece of advice do you have for first-time S-STEM proposal submitters? And we will start with Elise Lockwood. Elise?
Hi there, everybody. Thank you so much, Tara, and thanks for the chance to be here. Yeah, my name is Elise Lockwood. I am a professor in the math department at Oregon State University. My research is in math education. I study how undergrads reason about combinatorics and discrete mathematics. And I was a program officer from 2021 to 2024. So I just finished last August in the Division of Undergraduate Education. And I worked on several programs, but I did work on the S-STEM program all 3 years that I was there. And in that last year, I was a co-lead with Tom Kim and Mike Ferrara. I have not been an S-STEM PI, so I only have the perspective from kind of a program officer, but happy to be here and to hopefully answer some questions. I really like the question about one piece of advice, and hopefully more advice will come out through the course of the webinar. But I think the one overall piece of advice that I would have is to really focus on sort of telling your local story at your institution. So I think there can be this temptation to think, oh, I'm going to be competing with all these bigger institutions, or we're at a small institution. How am I going to tell this story? And really, it comes through like, who are your students? What's your situation as an institution? And yeah, what's sort of in place for how you really are going to support them. And I think that story can come through. And I think a strength of the S-STEM program, even maybe more than other programs, is that there is sort of this level playing field. It's not pitting R1s against, small, predominantly undergraduate institutions. Like, everybody has a chance to kind of tell their story for who their students are. And that should really come across, who are your students? How are you going to support them? What evidence do you have to support them where they are? And I think that can make for a strong proposal.
you. Great advice. Our next panelist is Yvette Pearson. Dr. Pearson, would you like to say hello?
Hi, and thank you, Tara, for having me, and thank you, everybody, for joining. I am a member of the advisory board for the S-STEM Rec, so happy to be connected with S-STEM in that way. My day job is Associate Dean. I'm at the University of Texas at Dallas, and I hold a dual Associate Dean appointment that crosses both the School of Natural Sciences and Mathematics and the School of Engineering and Computer Science. In terms of my other S-STEM experience, I've been PI and or co-PI on S-STEM projects at 4 universities over about the past 20 years. One current one is a track 3 that focuses on master students. Another one is a track 2 focused on transfer students. And I also had funding from NSF for an S-STEM capacity building workshop focused on helping faculty members from predominantly undergraduate institutions prepare competitive proposals. And that project resulted in a little over $30 million in awards to institutions. So really proud of that work. I also have a consulting company, and we've been external evaluator on several S-STEM projects over the years. And like Elise, although mine is probably about a decade before, I'm a former S-STEM co-lead at NSF and actually was part of the team that first created the solicitation that first started requiring the knowledge generation component. So a bit of history there, but happy to share insights from any of those lenses. In terms of a piece of advice that I would give PIs is get the evaluator involved early from day one as you're ideating about the project, and hopefully you're already there because we're only a couple of weeks away from submission now. But getting the evaluator involved early helps to really define your outcomes in a way that's measurable and helps them to plan an effective evaluation and knowledge generation process for your project, especially for track 1 and track 2. So getting them involved early. Reviewers and program officers can tell when PIs without the evaluation expertise kind of throw that evaluation plan in and just get somebody to sign and say, I'm an external evaluator. So get the expertise involved. It'll help your proposal be that much more competitive.
Thank you so much. And running at our panel.
Hi,
Dave Brown?
everyone. Thanks, Tara. I'm Dave, and you know, it's good that I'm coming in third here as the laggard because I don't have all the wonderful titles that I just heard my co-panelists present. But I did spend some time at NSF and had the great pleasure to overlap with Yvette. And I actually also continue to overlap with her as a member of the advisory board for the S-STEM Rec. But in my prior life, before becoming emeritus, I spent about almost 30 years in the California community colleges as a chemistry faculty member. My entire time spent there was as a faculty member. And early on in that time, in the mid-90s, I didn't know any better and decided to write my first NSF grant proposal, and my dean patted me on the head and said, you go right ahead and do that. But somehow, you know, like that first day in Little League when you swing the bat and the ball's coming at it, there's a non-zero probability that you're going to make contact. And somehow that first proposal, it wasn't an S-STEM proposal, but it did open the door to a cascade of future grants that were awarded. And that's what ultimately led to being invited to be a rotator at NSF. And I was there when the big tectonic change happened with the S-STEM program, going from primarily a scholarship program to one that understandably wanted to generate more knowledge for the knowledge base to understand what are strategies that are effective to support low-income, talented STEM majors across the entire fabric of higher education institutions, because it is a very complicated and diverse set of institutions, and there is no one size fits all. So I did take an offer it was a godfather moment. My institution had one of these early retirement incentives a few years ago that I snagged, and decided to go into free agency, which has allowed me to be currently a PI on an S-STEM proposal, or an S-STEM grant that is supporting one of the research hubs. It's called the Community College S-STEM Network. There's a pair of collaborative grants that support our network. The other grant, Michelle Van Noy at Rutgers University is the PI on that grant, and I'm the PI on the one that was granted to the Foundation for California Community Colleges. So together we're working to support community colleges and others who receive community college students as transfer students, et cetera, across a variety of dimensions. And my one piece of advice, boy, that's a tough question because there's so many pieces of advice I could give, because like Yvette, and actually we've cross-pollinated our workshop projects. I've had the good fortune to support an awful lot of folks who are developing proposals from community colleges through workshop projects. And I think, I'm kind of a technical, nerdy kind of guy. And I think one of the really important caveats is to ensure that you are aligned with the current program solicitation requirements, because in the past several years, the solicitation has changed pretty much annually. And so with a big group like we have today, it's almost certain that somebody out there is revising a proposal that was declined, and they may be focusing, understandably so, on what the reviewers and NSF program staff provided as feedback on where they could have strengthened the proposal, and may still have a mindset that's sort of aligned with that solicitation from last year. But there are some changes in the current solicitation, and Tara noted some of them. But one of the things that pops into my mind is the fact that in the previous solicitation, it was required to include a one-page analysis of job prospects for the S-STEM scholars and include it as a supplementary document. And now that requirement's gone. As a matter of fact, if you look at the revision notes for that, the current solicitation says do not include that. It should not be included. So you want to avoid those pitfalls of, and if you go on to read, way down into the weeds, page 26 of the current solicitation, under the additional program-specific solicitation consideration, it indicates that reviewers are going to be asked to provide some feedback on how well the proposed work describes those same job prospects and serving the workforce that was in that one pager from the year before. And so it still needs to come out of the pros from your proposal that you are going to be contributing to the workforce by supporting those low-income scholars. So my number one piece of advice is read the solicitation, the current solicitation, very closely. I mean, it's not quite like James Joyce Ulysses, but it's maybe a little more fun than that, but maybe not much, but it's still extremely important. Follow that link that Tara provided. Read the current solicitation.
Thank you so much for that, Dave. And also you answered sort of the next question that I was going to ask, which is, well, it's great. We're going with the flow together, which is, what are some of the common pitfalls to avoid? I think your answer, Dave, expressed both advice plus common pitfalls. So I'm wondering if Yvette or Elise have some thoughts about common pitfalls.
No, I think Dave hit the nail on the head. You can't go wrong if you read the current solicitation and are responsive to exactly what it asks for.
Yeah, I think a couple of pitfalls that come to mind are, well, so there's two things that I think tended to kind of be problematic for proposals that we saw. So one is, you really need to make sure that you have the students for what you're proposing. So it's harder to recruit and to give these scholarships, I think, than you think. And so, you have to make sure that that scholar pool is sufficient to be able to give the scholarships that you're proposing. So that's one piece. And I think maybe especially for smaller institutions, that can just be a fundamental challenge. And I think you need to be honest with yourself about your pool and the sort of ratio of people that you're proposing. And then the other kind of side of that, or related, is you still very much want to articulate that cohort model. And so I think reviewers want to know, what is that experience going to be for the students? So what's it going to be like to be a scholar in your program? And so it's not sufficient maybe to even just have like a litany of supports and a list of things. You really want to articulate, here are the few things that are really making our program unique and special, and this is what the cohort experience is going to be like for those students. And so that balance of making sure you have the students, but then once you have your numbers, really articulate very clearly this cohort. And even if you have 30 great supports on your campus, pick 4 of them to build your program around so that it doesn't feel overwhelming, so that there's a clear narrative for what it is that your students are going to be experiencing.
Can I add a quick add on to what Elise just said and something she said earlier? These are all great things to consider when you're writing your proposal. One thing that I've seen happen all too often in proposals is the use of conjecture to try to suggest what your students need, versus really doing that analysis of the local context, the learning environments, the majors you're supporting, the typical, develop a student archetype. Who are you serving? Do a gap analysis between the existing supports and what your student archetype suggests could be. And that's not to say, again, that there's one size fits all, that there is one particular student you're serving, but you can get a general sense of, are they commuter students? Are there a lot of, single parents? Whatever you might be serving at your institution in terms of the student population, tailor those supports according to what you know about your students, and make sure that comes through in what the reviewers read when they turn those pages of your proposal. I think that's so important.
And S-STEM does the best job out of any program at NSF that I've personally seen in telling you exactly what they want to see. So again, even in the slides that Tara just presented, it talked about having the institutional needs assessment and the literature review to inform those strategies, so you can make those strong connections. So the solicitation will lead you.
Thank you. Yes, it's always great to refer to the FAQ document and the recorded webinar that NSF put out, as they're all very detailed. This is a question regarding the new solicitations requirement for the new planning document. So since this is new, I'm not sure how much insight you have, but I want to pitch it to get your thoughts. What is the expectation for the new planning document? In previous years, there was inherently planning going on before recruiting. How do we separate the two sections, or do we? Can recruiting take place during planning?
I think that depends on your institution's cycle. This is new to the way to the solicitation, and so I can't give in the past with prior awards, it wasn't uncommon to see a planning period built in, just because when you get the funding, you're not ready to hit the ground running. You have to have some time to kind of ramp up and get things ready. So it's not atypical, even without this special carve out that's in the new solicitation, to have a first 6 months or even a year for planning. And where the recruitment starts depends on your university's recruitment cycle. Some people are on quarter systems, some people are on semester systems. So there's not a really cut and dry answer to that. You just have to make it make sense. Make it make sense for the readers, for the program officers, so that it's clear that you've given thought to how all of these moving parts work together at your institution.
Yeah, and my interpretation, I was looking back at the slides that Tara had provided about the planning document, and my interpretation is that it's less about sort of the recruiting and the kind of ramp up, and more because it's a track one where you really are sort of new to this in the last 5 years, like some designated time and a plan where you are actually going to give yourself sort of the space to set up so that you can be successful once you actually implement it. And so I think it's trying to avoid that, hey, we got the money, we're just going to go, when taking 6 to 12 months ahead of time to plan is going to make it better in the long run. And so it might be that some of that involves getting ahead with recruiting, but I interpreted it as like a separate from any kind of like actual recruiting that you would do with like a normal track two, that you are just building yourself a little bit more of a planning period. And they even mentioned that's why less, like more money can be spent investing during that time. And so less has to go to scholarships. And so I think that's how to think about that document.
Yeah, and referring to what this solicitation suggests would be appropriate activities, it talks about testing out some of the strategies. If you're going to be doing some particular intervention or set of interventions, you have an opportunity to try them out and refine or use some iterative opportunities to really polish them before the deployment with your cohorts. So you can try, if you're doing some new strategies that for any STEM majors, try them out for a while in that planning period so that you've had experience using those strategies and you learn something from those strategies that could help to refine them for that point in time when they're deployed for your STEM scholars. So I think that's an opportunity for really learning about how you can best serve those scholars.
Thank you. So we have a few questions related to staff time and staffing. We'll start with this one that asks, is there an average time or effort for a staff program manager position?
Go ahead, Yvette. I don't know if I know.
Okay, I was going to say there's really no rule of thumb. You just really have to think about the nature of your project. If you're doing a track 3, you might be well justified in having a full-time person, especially the track 3 that I'm involved in has 4 institutions plus 1 major workforce partners, and there's a lot of cat herding that has to go on. And we have a postdoc who's doing that legwork in addition to helping with some of the dissemination. In some cases, for instance, on our track 2, we budgeted for a halftime person. It's been very hard to get that position filled, to be quite honest, because it's hard to have some. We've been finding it hard to identify someone who is only wanting a halftime commitment, especially if it's something that requires you to be boots on the ground on campus because of all of the things that have to be done that can't not necessarily be done remotely all the time. So with any aspect of your project, and I saw a question I just answered and Travis answered in the chat, whether it's evaluation or this staff position or whatever type of time you're building in, just try to step back from it and think about what that responsibility looks like on a weekly or monthly basis and plan around that. It's never going to be an exact science. NSF knows that when the projects get funded, none ever go 100% according to plan, but you have to have a plan to get started. And it's got to be something reasonably scoped with what you say you're trying to deliver. And if changes are needed on the back end, then those things can be worked through.
Do you have something you're going to add, Elise?
No, I think that she answered that perfectly. Yeah.
Thank you.
And again, just well justified, right? And there are also limitations for individual institutions about who can be hired and what roles, and yeah.
I
So a
think
similar,
at least just use the right term to, well justified, because you're going to have to write in a budget justification why you're asking for that amount of money on that particular line in the budget. So that's probably not a bad place to start to think about how you can justify that position. What are they really going to be doing, and why are they needed? Why can't a PI do that with their compensation? And one thing, maybe I shouldn't even say this, but usually budgets are not deal breakers, right? The reviewers are concerned with the intellectual merit and the broader impacts of the proposed work, and budgets can be fixed if there's something that looks amiss. That's not likely going to lead to your proposal being declined all in its own right. So, but do your very best to justify every dollar very well. And if a program officer thinks something needs to be reduced or taken out, they're not very shy about telling you to do that or asking you to do that.
thank you. And with this question, Yvette, you had talked about how you hired a postdoc.
Mhm.
So can a graduate student be enlisted as program support person given a stipend?
Yes, and the thing is, if your project supports graduate students as scholars, you cannot have a scholarship recipient doing that work and getting the scholarship money for doing that work. So you may have scholarship recipients who would still qualify for this additional work outside. So you would just have to budget it separately. So if your population of students is graduate students, the scholarships are one thing. They're not doing any kind of work or activities. They just have to meet those academic and citizenship and financial requirements, period. But in addition to that, if the student is supporting the project in the way that you've asked here, that needs to be budgeted in section B of the budget worksheet, where the salaries and the following section, section C, where the fringe benefits are. So as long as you make those distinctions, yes.
Thank you. And we have two more questions related to staff time and budgeting. So can the PI or co-PI request 1 or 2 months salary support as extra compensation if they are a STEM administrator on a 12-month contract?
That depends on your institution. That would be a question to go back to your institution. I'll just be quite honest. Most times S-STEM funds, by the time for track 2 and track 3, you've put 60% squarely on the scholarship line. That's line F1 of the budget worksheet. And then you might have other funds going in participant support in other categories of other lines of category F on the budget worksheet. There's usually not a whole lot of salary left, especially by the time you pay the evaluator, you're planning for dissemination. So there may be conference travel, publication costs, and any, undergraduate or graduate student support that you have just to have hands on deck with some of the program management. There's usually very little salary, but whatever NSF does not disallow it, but you have to just check with your university on what their policies are for support, especially for the 12-month administrators.
And someone asks, what would you say is a typical personnel salary budget proportion of overall non-scholarship funds? And this is for a track 1 or track 2 grant.
Yeah, I think like Yvette said, not that much. I mean, it's definitely because of the requirement for so much of it to go to scholarships, like you are generally going to get the average PI, I think, is going to get much less compensated than on like a typical research grant. So it's going to be well below the 2 months typically. I mean, which is, I think, hard. And this is a balance in this program because I think it does require a lot of time and effort, but I think the PIs are not always going to see that compensated in terms of their time. And so I think realistically, by the time, as Yvette said, you've got travel, other student supports that are not scholarships also come from that 40%. So there was a question here about, the budget include access to stipends for students choosing to participate in unpaid internships. You can pay students for that type of thing. It just is in addition to that it's not the scholarship money. It has to be sort of additional money that is paid, or if you're paying them for some sort of research opportunity over the summer, that can't be part of the 60%, but it can be part of the 40%. The point just being, with all of that, and depending on what you're putting together, there's often very little compensation left for the PIs, unfortunately. So, you do your best, and hopefully you can get them some weeks or maybe a month or something, but it's not as much as you would typically get on a normal research project from what I've seen.
And unless we forget, out of that 40% also comes the indirect cost recovery charges. So depending on the indirect rate your institution has, that's going to take a slice of that 40%. And it just keeps getting, narrower and narrower. Valuation and other things come out of that for 6 years of support for personnel, it becomes very thin.
Thank you. And actually, at least going off of, you were starting to list some of the student support things that those monies can cover. Could it cover something like an international research experience?
So that's a great question. I do think technically, yes. I mean, right, that there is sort of I think that would be allowed, but you would just have to very much make the case. And so if it aligns again with kind of your situation, maybe your institution has some partner institution in Europe, and I mean, or it's like part of the field work is really needs to be in this part of, another country, then that's possible. But I think it would really have to be well justified, just given how tight the budget kind of is already. So something to discuss. I think often with the involvement of international options, it's like you really have to make the case that they couldn't get that experience nationally, right? And so sometimes that's the case with field work or certain expertise or something. But I don't know. And I'm curious what Yvette or Dave have to say about that too. But that's my feeling.
Yeah. Some questions about supplemental documents. Do you know is there a page limit for the supplemental documents?
I don't recall seeing one in the latest revision. There used to be one, which I think they did that exactly 1 year because it was bananas trying to get the things that you needed in there within that page limit. But just make sure you go to that section of the solicitation because it is very specific about what should be there. And you don't want to put any more there than is supposed to be there. But I don't remember seeing that there was a page limit specified. It's just the contents are specified.
Yes, you do not want to experience the dreaded return without review by including things that should not be there. And, the one document for track 1 that does have a page limit is the planning period can't be more than 4 pages. But I agree with Yvette. I don't think there's a total page limit for supplemental documents.
Yeah, that's right. And just keep in mind that the spirit, right, of the supplemental documents is you just never want it to seem like you're adding to the 15-page limit, that you're fitting in information that is not in the 15 pages. And that's why, like, the letters of commitment are these boilerplate letters often, because there's no fitting of extra information that is not in the 15 pages. And so for the 3 supplemental documents, the planning document for track 1, the table of scholars, and then the evaluation logic model, like, you want those to be of reasonable length. And so if you can, there's no reason that a table needs to be 5 pages long, right? So aim for a page for those logic models and evaluations. But I think it's true that there's not a page limit, but the spirit is that you are not fitting in any additional information into your project description.
Okay. I'm looking through the questions. Let's see. Here's one about professional development for mentorship. So what professional development would you recommend for the mentor? I'm assuming the faculty mentors, and any professional development providers for faculty that you could recommend.
I don't have any specific, people or frameworks, but I do think it can really vary, but some sort of attention to training or PD of mentors, I think is really good. So it might be that you have some existing program at your institution that faculty can go through, or you run a little PD that's based in some literature and research, or but it's just the idea that if mentoring, which mentoring should be a key part of this. It's shown to be very effective and important in supporting students. And so you just don't want you don't want it to read like, okay, our faculty don't need any mentor training. We're just going to let them go. They can train it. It's sort of, they can understand it. And so having whatever, it doesn't have to look like any specific thing, but it's more just the fact that you are paying attention to some preparation or mentoring of your faculty, I think is the important part. And I'm sure there's some that's better than others, and you can look at the literature. But it's not assuming that it's sort of a self-evident thing that everybody knows how to do, I think.
Thank you for that. So another question asked, how important are letters of support or collaboration for potential external sites or organizations that may or may not offer research or internship positions to S-STEM students, but who maybe did offer opportunities to university students in the past?
Well, NSF is very clear that they don't want letters of support. And what I mean by that is, in the past, we saw a lot of letters come through in proposals that said, Dave has this great project. He's a great guy. He's been doing great work, and this project will be great. It's a pat on the back. It tells nothing about what this entity will do to support this project. So instead, NSF several years back started requiring letters of commitment, which goes to the language that Elise referred to a few moments ago. And it's in the PAP guide, the proposal award preparation, proposal administration, I forget what it stands for, PAPPG. But you want to look at that as you're preparing your proposal, especially if you're a first timer. But there's boilerplate language there for the letters. And when you get letters, they really need to be from people who you've already discussed in the proposal. In the project description, you said that this office or this workforce partner is going to do these things. Or it might be mentioned in your facilities, equipment, and other resources document if it's something that's offered as no cost to the grant. But that boilerplate language basically says on that entity's letterhead that if Dave's proposal is funded, I agree to do what Dave said in the project description or the facilities, equipment, and other resources document. So please do not just go and get letters from people to beef up and make it look like a whole bunch of people support your project if you have not intentionally included them in some way.
Yeah, and I'll just add, what was I gonna say? Yeah, and I think you also want, so I agree with everything that Yvette said, and I think the biggest thing about the letters of collaboration, or a big thing, is that if you are proposing any kind of partnership, you want that to be an authentic partnership that exists, right? So if you're saying, oh, we're going to work with two-year colleges in the area, you can't just say that. You need to really establish that you have some partnership, or we have these industries that we're already, that's already there. And so it's that, like, demonstrating the existence of that collaboration already, as opposed to something more aspirational. And so that's that, if you're going to propose some partnership, that should be well established as you're submitting the proposal.
And if I can tack on to that, let's just think about this word partnership. Because, and I'm speaking now with my hat on as a former faculty member at an HBCU. A lot of times, and this was earlier in my career, people would reach out to me to quote unquote partner on a proposal, but they never asked for my input or whatever. They just asked for my NSF PI documents and they submitted something, and I might have gotten this much of the budget, if anything. That is not a partnership. And so make sure when you're describing your plans, especially you're looking at track 3 proposals between 4-year and 2-year institutions or among minority serving institutions and historically white institutions or what have you, make sure you describe a mutually beneficial partnership, because it can't just be this one-sided thing.
Good advice.
And people will follow the money. So if you say, oh, we got this great partnership, but the partner only gets this much, people are going to see through that.
Yeah, absolutely. And one other just question about, what requires a letter of commitment, because sometimes there are like institutional things that you might be leveraging. And so if it's sort of a part of your just natural, normal, what you have access to, like you don't need a letter of commitment from, your department or something. But if there's like something on campus, I mean, okay, I don't know about, yeah, I was going to say an office of like diversity, equity, and inclusion, which from the old days, but okay, or like some sort of office that you're really relying on, or there's a mentor program that exists on campus and we're really going to leverage it, then it could be a good idea to have a letter of commitment letter of commitment or collaboration, because it's something out of the ordinary that's just not assumed to be just part of your normal workings as an institution. So that can be a good kind of rule of thumb, whether you need that letter. Is it something that just in your kind of reasonable everyday you would normally have access to, or is it something that really requires some commitment from another area? Yeah. And can I was gonna,
Sure,
can
go
I
ahead.
comment on the first question here about the scholar pool and the
Yes,
money
I was
and
just going to ask that. Yes. So
because I
this
think that's
question,
a great question. Go
I
ahead.
guess summarizing it is this person identified the unmet need in their institution to be a certain amount and did the math for their maximum award amount over the number of years, and says this will come out to supporting about 20 students only during the course of 4 years. Is this acceptable and enough? What is the standard? Go ahead, Elise.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, I do think that's a shift that's happened over the last couple of years, where I think earlier on it was maybe, oh, you can give, $5,000 scholarships to more students, but they are now very explicit about filling up those buckets and wanting full support for, even if that means fewer students, right? So the budget is what it's going to be. And so if you are giving only 50% of that 2 million, to your students and the unmet need is that high, then that's fine. And so it's less about the numbers of scholars that you're having an impact on, but that you can actually fill the buckets for those students for the duration of their time. So and it kind of gets back to the point about the local story, right? Like it's fine. We're not comparing numbers of cohort sizes. They can be very small. And that's, I think, where the program wants to be in terms of supporting students.
Yeah, it is definitely all about the Benjamins. It's about the numbers. You're providing data that's validated by your Office of Financial Aid and other aspects within the institution that generate the cost of attendance. And that can vary widely across this patchwork of institutions of higher education. Certain parts of the country, the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, or Southern California, or urban New York, wherever it might be, may have a much higher cost of living than rural parts of middle America. And, so there are going to be students who have that full 15K per year need that's unmet through other, right? S-STEM's the last dollar, so they may get Pell and other sources of support. But even with all that, there still may be a $15,000 per year need that gets eaten up pretty quickly over 6 years and $1 million. And so, yes, smaller numbers are not a ding if the data support what you're proposing. That's what it's all about. Make your case based on the local needs, cost of attendance, the information that comes out of the FAFSA that they submit, and the numbers are what the numbers are.
And the other thing that I'll add, and Elise said it, she said it in a different way, but I just want to say it again, is that you don't want to look at awarding, certainly for the ease of preparing your proposal, you get this average amount from the financial aid office and you do your calculations based on that. But when you start making actual scholarship awards, you are going to be working with the financial aid office to get the exact amount of unmet need for each student. And so you're not going to be awarding $6,000 across the board. So those numbers are going to ebb and flow because it needs to be awarded based on student need up to the maximum allowed by NSF. So just be mindful of that. And just to kind of give a little bit of backstory, in terms of thinking about the duration of support and the emphasis, and you're doing the right thing of looking at supporting them all the way through. In the past, it was not uncommon to have proposals come in that said, oh, you know what? We noticed a significant amount of attrition for engineering students between the second year and the third year. So we're going to provide scholarships that help get them over the hump. But what was happening was you would have students then that had need and were not supported through those other 2 years. And so NSF wants to make sure, and this is spelled out in the solicitation, that we're not just getting students over humps, but we're getting them to some finish lines. And those finish lines are completed degrees. And if they're in, undergraduate programs or maybe some master's programs, the other option, the other finish line would be a more advanced degree program that's S-STEM eligible. So just kind of keep those things in mind.
So there's a question related to timeline, actually. It asks if our second cohort arrives in year 3 and we should support them for up to 5 years, would we request an extension of the grant period?
NSF allows no cost of what we call a freebie, no cost extension at the end of the award period. But you don't want to write your proposal as if you're counting on that. What you want to do is write your proposal in a way that describes your plans to get students through to whatever finish line that you've articulated. And sometimes, and more often than not, that means you're not taking in new cohorts after a certain point because you're focusing on finishing the ones who were there.
Yeah, and you can also, if it helps with the math, I mean, it is allowable for up to 5 years, but if you have, again, the data that most of our students are finishing in 4 years, we can reasonably count on them finishing in 4 years, and then you can sort of worry about extra students. You could fund them in the no-cost extension, but yeah, like Yvette said, you don't want to write that in. But you don't have to allow. Yeah, you can look at the data and see what the average kind of graduation time is, and if it's 4 years, you can generally work with that. But know that you have that 5th year if any student needs it.
There's one more technical question, again, going to this new solicitation that I'm not sure if you know the exact answer to. But since for the track 1, the budgeted amount, scholarship amount was changed from 60% to 50%. Does NSF expect that 10% difference to be spent in the planning period then?
I think some of it, but go ahead, Dave. Yes.
No, you go ahead, Elise. Sorry.
Well, no, I was just going to say, it looks like, I don't think it's like it has to be a clean and dry 10% spent in that first year. It just allows for a little bit more time. But it's pretty flexible.
Yeah, and I was just going to say the S-STEM solicitation, as Yvette sort of alluded earlier, is pretty prescriptive. If they wanted that 10% to be spent on planning period activities and support, they would have made that explicit. So I think it's just an opportunity to have a little more money that isn't earmarked for scholarships to do non-scholarship work, including the planning period. But I don't think you need to partition your budget that includes exactly 10% of it into the planning period. But I think it's flexible, like Elise was saying.
I see another question that I'd like to tackle.
Sure, go ahead.
So there was a question about supporting graduate students, and it says our institution does not consider financial aid for graduate students. Grad students can only consider student loans through FAFSA. Why are reviewers focused on what financial aid offices calculate for graduate students when the norm is no graduate student assistance? And my response to that is that this is, institutions operate very differently when it comes to support for graduate students, and things are on an institution by institution basis. What I will say is that this is a time when you definitely want to not send an email. You want to get on a call, get in a meeting with your financial aid office, make sure that they know the nuts and bolts of the S-STEM program. In this particular case, with S-STEM, student loans should not count against a student's need. In fact, if possible, having them graduate without that loan debt would be the preference. So if the S-STEM funds can be used to replace need-based loans, that would be an option, but that's something you have to work with your financial aid office with. In my experience, I find that so you said your institution is towing the line of no support for graduate students? I honestly have never heard of that, so I probably don't have an answer to your question, because if your institution will not support it, I don't know how to even guide you around that. I thought it was basically around the need determination and finding where they could support it. So I tried. I don't know if Dave or Elise.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like with the grad students, it's just it's a maybe less prescribed kind of formula for determining that need, right? I mean, so I think it's a little bit more variable perhaps, but yeah, I haven't heard of, yeah, I haven't heard of places just being like, you absolutely can't support your grad students, but yeah, if that's the line that your financial aid office is taking, there's not a lot NSF can do about that, I think.
And Beth added a comment about it's virtually impossible to prove need for graduate students as they don't complete the FAFSA. So again, that comes in working with not just your financial aid office, but however your admissions for graduate programs is handled, whether it's, department level, school level, or university level. Because with the master's S-STEM that I'm currently part of, and again, this is 4 different universities having to do things 4 different ways. We have to have a way for the students. Each of the 4 universities said they would use FAFSA in different ways, but each university had its own way of doing that. But making sure the students know ahead of time that they need to apply for this. And so that's where sort of the recruitment, the in-house recruitment, starting that early with your junior and senior level students at your institution, so they'll know to go ahead and apply for it, even though it's not common for graduate students. It gets a bit trickier when you start, that's for master students. It gets a bit trickier when you start moving into doctoral students. I do know people who have doctoral programs funded, but it's a bit harder because most of the time the universities are taking care of those needs. But again, I just don't have an answer for the situation where the university just flat out says you can't support graduate students. Honestly, this is me talking. I just think that's horrible.
There's one more question related to graduate students while we're on the topic. If there is a 5 years bachelor's to master's program, would the student be eligible to receive funding for all 5 years, or just the bachelor's portion, or just the master's portion?
At least
I thought
you're
it was
more recent.
Yeah, I thought it was per degree actually. So I thought that you could get you could get the full support of the 5 years for your undergrad, and then you could get additionally the support as a master's student. And so if it's a joint, if they're distinct, sort we have like an accelerated master's program or something. I'm looking for the question. If it's a bachelor's to master's and they're separate degrees, so they get the bachelor's and then they get the master's, I think they're eligible for each. And so as long as they're a bachelor's student, they should get the 15,000 max, but then when they transition to being a master's student, then they can separately, so they could conceivably get like 6 years. I mean, maybe even 7 years, I guess, if they got the 5 and the 2. That's my understanding, but I'm not positive.
Yeah, I would say that would be a question. I know the program officers are kind of out of pocket now, but that's a good program officer question. I think if the proposal is written specifically to support those, here we call them fast track students. So if it's written specifically to that population, it seems that it would cover just that time because they're taking the classes for the master's while they're completing their undergraduate degree, and those classes are counting on both sides. So if you're writing specifically to that narrow population of students, it seems that the 5 years would cover their engagement in that program. But other than that, my understanding is like Elise's, that it would be two separate ones if there are two separate populations.
Thank you. So a majority of the questions we have open are related to the same topic. So I kind of wanted to throw it all out there at once. This is concerning the language of DEI related terms. You know, what advice, if any, do you have or insight about modifying language that they use in their proposal, about outcomes that look at specific underrepresented groups? You know, there's a lot of confusion and people are uncertain, and just wondering if you could talk about this and provide some insight.
I can just, I mean, so yeah, I guess, you know, we're all kind of there with you. I think we also, I'll speak for myself. I don't know anything, and I don't, we don't have any inside information about what's happening. I think, and it's very stressful. I think we're all kind of in it, right? So, you know, we're just, yeah, all thinking of each other. One comment I'll make. So I do think there's sort of this balance between, you know, how strategic to be or not to be. And I'm hoping that NSF at some point will have some guidance about what to do, right? Because is it that we really do need to avoid that language or whatever? One comment I will make about STEM that I think is ironically kind of helpful. Like a frustrating aspect of STEM sort of is like frustrating and good is that really all that can determine, right, the scholarship is financial need, citizen status, and, you know, academic talent. And it really is the case that in any kind of recruiting, selection, or whatever, you cannot pick based on any other attribute besides that. And so that's actually coming to be helpful now. So we, you know, in the past we've struggled with, well, we really want underrepresented students to get these scholarships. We want students of particular backgrounds or whatever to have this. And that is now sort of, I mean, you can frame that as a way to sort of just take that off the table. Like you don't have to worry about it. Now, we would often talk about recruiting and recruiting widely very diverse populations to be able to get more women or certain backgrounds or minorities. But and so I don't know, and I'm curious what my colleagues here think. I don't know if the answer is to back off from that because it sort of is a little bit safer or something, or I mean, but I also understand that that's not good either. Like we want to stand up for what we want to fund and who we want to support. And so I don't know the answer even just for moving forward, what the right answer is there. But I think STEM is unique in that it's about about low income students, and that can remain the sort of mission of this without feeling like you have to go against maybe your morals or something. But anyway, curious what my colleagues think, but we're with you and we have no answers. I have no answers.
Absolutely. You know, again, this is my own nerdiness. Every day recently, and I mean every day without fail, I check the NSF website to see if the broadening participation in STEM webpage is active. And it was active this morning still. So to that end, as a critical part of their mission, broadening participation in STEM is an important aspect of that. And so, but again, you want to sort of tiptoe through the tulips carefully with the language. And, you know, every one of the 40-ish thousand proposals that NSF receives annually is reviewed according to the same two merit review criteria, the intellectual merit of the proposed work and the potential for broader impacts. And in that broader impacts criterion is a, you know, reference to diversifying the professional STEM workforce. And in order to change that, the National Science Board would have to convene, and you know that's dictated to NSF through a very separate entity, which, you know, the layers of effort to change that are not trivial. And so I think for the time being, you know, with the caveat of using the careful language, there is still this, and we're all in this together, as Elise was saying. There's not a one of us here that doesn't still adhere to that mission. I think carefully tailoring your language to address those issues is still an important consideration, and don't give up the ship.
Yeah, I agree. I think being mindful of language is important. I'm going to put on a little bit different hat, and I'm going to speak very slowly because I know we're being recorded, and I want to make sure I don't say the wrong thing in the wrong way or the right thing in the wrong way. So this is me looking through a different lens. Being a former vice president for diversity, equity, and inclusion in a state that passed a law saying what they define as DEI is illegal, and having had my converted 100% compliant office terminated along with 20 jobs, including mine, I'm a bit more cautious. So my advice would be to focus squarely on the population of low-income students. I think the best position you can be in right now is being at a minority serving institution, because your population is your population. And so you know you're going to benefit those. But I can't say that celebrating your population, which is the entirely right thing to do, I can't say that it won't hurt you. We don't know. Literally every day we wake up, there's something different. And so I like to think about the what ifs. And some of the what ifs are thinking about who the reviewers are going to be, because the reviewers are making judgments and making recommendations to program officers. And I know during that time, when my office was going through all of the topsy-turviness, even though we had clearly had a plan for a new office that was 100% compliant with the law. And I say that over and over again, and it's even in the press release that announced the closure of our office. And even though we had things focused on aspects of our work that was in compliance with the law, and we explicitly showed it in the proposal, this is an explicit exemption in our law, and so we're not going to run into any problems. We had reviewers and we had proposals decline, and some of the comments from reviewers were about they're not going to be able to do this because of the law. They're not going to be able to do this because of XYZ. So I say that to say this: think about the review process, and think about how rapidly things are changing every day and all of the uncertainty. Because like Elise said, we don't have the answers. We don't know. And clearly, we all treasure and value this work and recognize the importance not only to our students, but also to our society for the problem solving that comes out of the students becoming employed in these STEM disciplines. So I just say proceed with caution. When you think about dealing with the broader impacts criterion for merit review, I did a workshop once or segment once on a broader view of broader impacts. So certainly that full participation is one. So talk about the full participation of students from low income backgrounds in the scientific enterprise. But then look at all of the other areas of broader impacts, the ways that your project can help benefit society, and build on those as well, so that you're showing that aspect of the merit in addition to all of the other things that you're doing. So it sounds a bit pessimistic, but once you've been bitten, you kind of proceed with caution, and that's what I would encourage.
Thank you. It was so helpful to have that conversation. Really appreciate your honest reflections and really good advice in navigating these uncertain times. One of the questions we do have is there a concern that S-STEM will not be awarded at all, instead be rewritten or canceled? We can say that we have received confirmation that the March 4th, 2024 deadline stands. So, those proposals are being accepted. And with the solicitation that has been put out there. And not only that, NSF has asked us to advertise the call for reviewers for the 2025 cycle. So Yvette talked about how important it is for the makeup of those review panels and those individuals who serve as reviewers. If you're interested in serving as a reviewer for this upcoming cycle, you can complete this short form as well. So we do know that as the 2025 award cycle is going forward, and they will be reviewed, awards will be given, but that's all we know. And as people mentioned, we're waiting every day for updates, and we're in the same boat as together, and the rec will be sure to share any information that we receive from NSF as soon as we receive it, but we'll likely all receive it at the same time. So really appreciate our panel today. We're almost at time, so I just want to wrap up our panel today for joining us and really helping us out in navigating not only the 2025 proposal, but navigating these uncertain times. We are so happy to have you join us and so appreciative of your honesty and your wisdom. We do want to remind everybody to complete our survey to provide your feedback on our session today. We really use these responses that you put in there to help us tailor our future offerings. So thank you in advance for providing your feedback. And also, it's great to connect with you all today. We want to keep in touch with you. So if this was your first event with the S-STEM Rec, we hope to see you at others. Please explore our website, join our newsletter, help us build community by interacting with us on social media. And thank you all for joining us today. Thank you again to our wonderful panelists. And we look forward to engaging with you in future rec events. The recording will be posted on our website, and hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and best of luck with your NSF S-STEM proposal submissions. Thank you all.